I'd like to call this Committee of the Whole meeting to order, please. And one of the purposes this afternoon is to discuss some more on the ARPA funding, and then to mention a number of things that we still need to address in future COWs, and ask the administrator and attorney to look at these and kind of set up an order when the information can be available so we can plan them. When we left here last time talking about this, there was considerable interest in spending some money on the rehabilitation of the church building and house next to the church that we own down in front of the Board of Elections. And excuse me, I was just wondering if there's any further thoughts on that, or we want to move ahead with that. And certainly do that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I apologize for not being at the meeting last week, and so if it was covered, just let me know and we can talk later. But I'm imagining any funding that goes towards rehab of that church starts with design and engineering. But is there any consensus among this board as to what the purpose, what its use would be?
There was no conversation about this. There was just private direction to me to look at.
It was
The
on the house.
engineering, I had previously mentioned that was on a department head's ARPA request for the CAC building, and that perhaps we should be looking at it for the CAC building, but I don't believe there's been any formal direction by this board on that matter.
Am I right that if you're going to start doing engineering, you probably should have a pretty good idea of what its intended use is going to be?
It would be helpful, yes. I mean, it's going to be tough to design. That's why we haven't gone anywhere with it yet, because there's been a couple of different ideas kicked around about both of those buildings. The CAC was just one of those ideas.
Right now, the CSE is only located in Cattaraugus County.
We rent space in Wellsville, is that right?
We
Yes.
do. We were looking to exit that lease, however, the space itself was not appropriate. Ms. Kays was looking for other space in Allegheny County. She certainly is very interested in moving the CAC to these buildings in Belmont. We talked about that for a couple of years, but as you know, she was also looking at some gap funding requests today.
I don't mean to throw a wrench into the situation. I know that the CAC is near and dear to many people's hearts. I don't think that building is an appropriate use for the Child Advocacy Center. I think it's too prominent a building in town. I think it has value aesthetically and through its location that would be better served for something more along the lines of economic development. But I'm talking about the church.
I thought the thing was the house next door.
Oh, you're talking about the house?
No, actually, they were talking about both buildings. That was an idea I had mentioned previously, was that Commissioner Kays would like to use both buildings for the CAC. Really, you do need to decide what the purpose of the building is before we ask DPW to go out for an engineering study. It would be good use of ARPA money, though, because we have those buildings just sitting there. They can't sit there forever like that.
Mr. Healy?
Any other funding out there? I know we got other space needs, social services, et cetera. I've been telling people for years, Schuyler County, they got a whole HR building across the street. The state paid for the whole thing, all the social services and everything's over there, that type of services. It's great too, because it separates the children and the people that they service, from the main public, gives them a little more privacy. It's a good place for children to play. They have playgrounds that are actually fenced in. You can enter from the building. I don't know, just that part of our bigger space needs.
You have significant space need issues that are going to arise in the next 5 to 10 years, if not sooner. You're creating a new Department of Economic Development. You're just going forward with that local law earlier today. That is not going to be one person. Currently, we have one person through a contract. That's more than likely a couple of employees. You're more than likely going to be creating a conflict defender office, which probably will be 5 employees or more. You've talked about county code enforcement. That will also be employees in space. That's space we don't have currently. What we do currently have are people outsourced out to Crossroads. You have OFA, veterans, fire, emergency services, and planning, and buildings that you've paid $2 million over the past few years to lease. That probably doesn't make sense to continue a long-term lease there. You have people in mental health up in Wellsville leasing a house. You have WIC also up in Wellsville. You have a lot of other buildings on these campuses, including 2 buildings for employment and training and another building out in the parking lot. And this building, which is almost 50 years old and will need a new roof probably in 5 years and new windows. You need to look at your space needs, both for your current needs and the needs as some of these offices grow. And whether you look at utilizing these church properties or not, you're going to need to invest some money. And you're going to need to do some studies, both space needs studies and engineering studies. You're going to need to do some capital planning as well.
Well, I know you took a look at the Belmont School, but I mean, $2 million we've paid out for and over down to Crossroads, and that's not the best. Those buildings and facilities down there, $2 million would go a long ways towards the Belmont School, or rehabbing it, or tearing it down, and perhaps getting some state funding for a human services building at that location. I mean, to me, I think that would be a worthwhile.
I did look at the Belmont School recently. Obviously, the building itself isn't usable for county government at the moment, but the location is of interest to me. I don't have any recommendations at the moment. I went down and took DPW, IT, Mr. Boyd with me just to see what the current status was. It makes sense to me when you're looking at future building projects to look within the village of Belmont because it is the county seat. You do need to keep some of your offices here by statute unless you have a permissive countywide referendum. And also, the more offices you keep close, the better it is for consolidation of services. So IT services all of our county offices. It's very difficult for their office of 4 people to service people all across the county. And I didn't even mention, you have your DPW shops all over the county. You have county towers and other sites that are managed. Somebody's got to go out there. It's who's plowing these roads? How are the phones maintained? The more things you have closer together, the more efficient our administrative services are, whether that's public works or IT. So I prefer things that are close.
Carissa, can I ask about the space study? Do we hire a consultant to do that? Will there be a committee put together to work on that? What is the procedure, and what has it been in the past?
My understanding in the past is you've had a couple of different ad hoc committees on building space. I think you might want a standing committee on it going forward. That'd be a recommendation that you look at something like that. We've had several space needs studies in the past, and I think unfortunately every board has almost gone in the complete opposite way of what was in those studies. It makes no sense to me. But if you look at how some of the other counties are using their ARPA money, it does include space needs. I know I was reading a little bit about some recent developments in Steuben County. They're using some of their ARPA through their building space committee to do some, I'm trying to think, it's their 911 building / public emergency type of building. They're taking down some structures and building a new building. Other counties are doing similar things.
Well, the school, and just to revisit that briefly here, that another plus is it's already not on the tax roll. And also there's they got parking behind the school, or property behind the school that the village, I believe, owns, and has agreed that they would be willing to give up. The IDA has a parking lot also across the street. And you got services there, which is, as we found out with the jail, when they didn't figure in the water line and telephone and all those extras, not only is close to make it handier for servicing those departments and interaction between departments, but also the infrastructure is a big item today.
I love the location of the Belmont School, and I love the things that you just mentioned. It is a very, very, very large project for this board to undertake. That is not an ARPA money project. That is a bond project of several millions of dollars. And that would be something, part of my job as a county administrator is to evaluate our spaces and to look for opportunities. That's an opportunity I examined. I haven't ruled it out. I haven't ruled it in. I just looked and gathered some facts and took DPW with me, so.
Well, I wasn't sure what the status was. Thank you.
See your light on. Well, do we want to move forward with the downtown buildings because the funding could come out of ARPA, not so much out of the normal channels of money that we have?
Can you define downtown buildings, Mr. Chair?
Well, I meant the church and the house next to it.
I think
Have
it's
that plan
it's a
done?
temporary Band-Aid, in my opinion, at the school. 20, 30 million to rehab, 3 or 4 million to tear it down. I think that's sidetracked.
Chairman, I think I understood them saying that there are some things that we needed to do before we could approach that. Am I clear on that, or? I don't know.
I think yes. I think you need to make some other decisions before we just spend. I would have no way of putting an ARPA resolution together unless you make other decisions, including the use of the building and other things.
Yeah, but
And-
then to go ahead and do that, I'm saying
Okay.
head in that direction.
Okay.
But
I
the
just-
last discussion we had when they were talking about that, there seemed to be pretty much positive vibes all the way around the horseshoe here for working for the Child Advocacy Center. But
Mr. Chair, could we at least move forward to getting DPW in there and giving us their suggestions and advice? And
I don't know who has to do it, but, but it's just, this whole, the list of things that we've talked about already that we've got to come back to eventually, including the three major things, pictometry and what, security stuff, and one more thing, where
So,
the
Mr. Chairman,
time for them to do the work. Yeah.
so, Mr. Chairman,
agree.
regarding the pictometry, after the last discussion that we had about it, there was a,
There's still some
there's
unanswered
still some
questions from
unanswered questions, but we are working on it. And we do hope to have more about that shortly for the board, for the boards, to present to the board. But this group here is working on that, and we have been working on it, so that is in the works.
Yeah.
The pictometry, we have several different quotes depending on what resolution we want. I'm waiting for some input from some of the department heads on what they feel would be the most useful as far as resolution. The greater resolution you have from these aerial flyovers, the higher the expenses. So, you don't want to spend too much if you're not going to use the greater resolution. You also talked about the law enforcement records management. The sheriff's office has done a good job obtaining those quotes and has left me with a little bit of homework to talk to the vendor about some of their quotes and what they include and what they don't include, and trying to negotiate a little bit on that. And then the last one would be the buildings control system, and I believe DPW is working on that. That one's not something that needs to go urgently. The pictometry one is fairly urgent because we'd like to get, if you're going to decide to do that, we'd like to get a flight scheduled this fall.
Yeah, I'm not playing at all. I was aware of those things and simply put them out there that these are things you folks are already working on. And then we sit here and say, well, before we can vote on something else, we got to have some more work done. It goes back to the same people, and you don't have time to keep up with what's there right now for you to do. So I don't,
It all comes back to the same people no matter what you do anyways, so it's okay, that's what we're here for. I took from this board's consensus the last couple of cows you had on ARPA that you wanted to spend some money on public safety and mental health and economic development. So You had some great ideas, but maybe not specific projects. I did speak a little bit to Bonnie. I've not caught up with Jeff yet, but I spoke to Bonnie. The same, I spoke to the undersheriff. I didn't catch up to the sheriff yet, and just told them if they had specific projects that might support some of these board goals on public safety, to let me know. They had a list on the ARPA. Maybe they have some other things that they think you might be interested in. And the same on mental health. I spoke to Dr. Anderson yesterday and said, I think this board's willing to invest some more county dollars in mental health. And these are some of the very general areas that they're interested in mental health. And if he has specific projects that he thinks could support that, to bring them. And then I also spoke to Keir Durham about the planning and economic development goals. So I put those feelers out there to the department heads to try to support some of the missions of this board.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
we have a lot of opportunities here to spend this money. And what I see us doing is we're kicking them around and kicking them around. We need to settle on a few things. I know some are in the works. We need more information before we can commit, and I get that. Going back a little bit, well, first let me preface by saying infrastructure is never a bad investment. Going back to, you were speaking about the house and the church downtown. I think the Child Advocacy Center in the house is a marvelous idea that we need to move on. The church, as you mentioned, is a little different kind of a building. It's a little harder to pigeonhole. I know that the Board of Elections is running out of room as well. I would suggest, and I'm not sure how this would be done, this is one of those ideas without any teeth, I would suggest that the church be made into a multi-use building that could be used either by the Board of Elections or perhaps used by the Child Advocacy Center or perhaps used as some kind of meeting space, a multi-use building. But we need to make a decision to move forward on some of this stuff. We continue to spin our wheels. Thank you.
I think going back to probably getting a building space subcommittee and having some real assessments of your county property that you own, whether it's used or unused, will help you. I think Commissioner Kays was looking at using both buildings and probably could not operate a CAC out of just the house alone. And I think there may be some issues with the church as an open meeting space. You have different levels of use, have different building codes associated with them. So it all depends on how you want to use it and how much money you want to invest. If you want to use it as an open meeting space, you might have to invest more than if you wanted to use it as office space or other things. So those are some really questions that we'd have to answer on those properties before we really know how we want to plan for them.
So we want to move forward with forming this ad hoc committee, maybe making it standing committee?
If you'd like to go in that direction, I probably could work with our brand-new superintendent, Mr. Windus, and come up with some recommendations of what a subcommittee should focus on and some of an inventory of our properties for you to consider.
Carissa, when does your deputy start? That might be,
She's starting August 25th, so I do have a couple projects lined up for her that are time-sensitive, including finishing our salary study and a couple of other things. But I think, yes, this would be a good one for her to maybe be involved in, too.
I think that would be a step in the right direction, Chairman, to get moving on it.
So I'm supportive of exploring and establishing this committee.
Yes.
Anybody opposed to that? Okay. Mr. Barnes?
Well, I'm not for it, not opposed to it. I'm just trying to figure out what the value of that property is. Personally, I think the church building should be torn down and the space made available for future development for the county. And improvements to the house if that's possible, or replacement of that also. So anyway, on that particular thing, I'm betwixt and between, really.
But that's what this committee would be tasked with, bringing a recommendation
That's just an improv.
on that. Well, that's part of what that committee would do, as the space needs. Yeah,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
I'm totally in favor of the establishment of some kind of committee, space needs committee. But in reality, to stand up a committee like that, that's going to address things such as major renovations, land purchase, building from scratch, there's no way we could turn it around fast enough to use ARPA money towards those goals. Not that I'm saying it's not an important endeavor, but we might as well forget about ARPA money for that stuff if that's the intention.
I actually think, and I don't mean to disagree with you completely, I'm not, but for some things, you probably could use some ARPA money, because I think you're gonna see some repairs maybe out of there, and some other things that perhaps you could use ARPA money for if you don't have anything else specific within that bucket. You talked kind of a bucket of goals. If you have some improvements you wanna do to 911 or other buildings to support some public safety, you might be able to talk about it in a building space committee as well. But you're right, for big projects, there's no way you'd have time to turn around a big project like a building or renovation. You might be able to do some of the studies, but that's about it.
But that's not to say the need's not there or that other avenues of funding might not be there down the road.
That's correct. You have like I said, you have a ton of building space needs.
Okay, we'll get started in that direction then. We do have a request from Jim Helms, who's CEO at Jones Memorial Hospital, to come back and share with us once again. And we need to set that up for one of the cows. And we'll get reports. We need some time to go back and visit the water line issue that got just partway along, right? I see your hand going to the button.
I think you were on the water line issues. You were going to allow time for your county attorney and the IDA attorney to speak, and I don't believe that has been arranged. I believe the IDA attorney is still trying to find some time for our county attorney.
Okay.
So it would make no sense to schedule that because you won't have any information. And if anybody was wondering about Mr. Helms, he came and spoke to the chairman, and myself, Tim and Terry were also there. It was last week or the week and a half ago. And he just told us about the updates to the building construction project at Jones and wanted to know if maybe the rest of the board would like to see that in a committee of the whole. He could bring slides and a presentation. It sounded like a good idea to us. So I think that's what that's going to be focused on, is just generally how Jones is doing. And they've got some big things going on that some visual presentations would be nice.
No, I'm just mentioning things that are there, and eventually we got to get back to. So, anything else you want to bring up here today? Mr. Barnes?
Yes, I mentioned this before, and that is, I think that some major improvements to the Allegheny County Fairgrounds should be considered. I took upon myself to make a trip over to the Cattaraugus County Fair to investigate how they do things, and what kind of facilities they have. They're way ahead of Allegheny County in a lot of ways. This past a couple of weeks ago, when they had the Cattaraugus County Fair, they had over 100,000 people attend. They had their grandstand, which is covered and seats 3,800 people, with additional seating and bleachers and seating out in front of the grandstand. They had one event during the fair that attracted over 5,000 people at $45 per person. Very profitable for the fair. They had another event that was had about 3,000 people, again at $45 per person. We could never do that at present at Allegheny County Fairgrounds. we need some major improvements down there, especially in the grandstand area and the stage area. I really think that we should get the Fair Board to come in and make a presentation of what their plans are, and think seriously about making some improvements to the county fairgrounds. This being an opportunity to bring more people into Allegheny County for events, and also for all of Allegheny County residents to get more utilization out of the fairgrounds. Thank you.
Mr. Demick, I thought you might have something to say about this.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Gary, but the little aspect I can bring to light is I did have a conversation yesterday. Phil and I talked while we were at the Office of the Aging picnic. I found one of the directors and was able to have a conversation with him. They've had some infrastructure issues up there that involve water lines, gas lines, and the biggest part was paving at the time. So I conversated with him about the paving because I can work on the paving. We actually set up the first part of next week to meet. I've got somebody that's going to come and we're going to work on figuring out the cost to it, have a proposal written up and bring it back here that we can use some in-house use of the county's paver that they have rented till the end of September, towns, trucks, county trucks. We can put this together in a minimal charge. But my question to them was, if we pave now, is the infrastructure they need to repair going to be affected? Their answer was no, because they felt they could push under anything we paved, which is very true. Is not a big deal, but it would be very nice to get that paving part done and out of there and done right. And they added to it a little bit more, which would be the exit road they forgot they owned. So, I mean, we're going to lay it all out. But I agree, and I think that the best thing they should do, I've had a lot of confusion trying to make the contacts to even get this much done. I think they need to come and meet with us at some point in time to be here and, express what everybody's thinking and express what they're looking at and what their needs really are, instead of just throwing it in a letter and everybody, I think this is what they need type of thing, so, thanks.
Mike?
Phil, do you know who owns the Cattaraugus County Fairgrounds?
No, I assume it's the Cattaraugus County. You're talking about the Allegheny County?
The Cattaraugus County.
I assume it's Cattaraugus Fair Board. I'm not sure. I did not look into that.
Because here it's a separate entity, and I think, and I'm not against the fair by any means, but as long as it's a separate entity, I'd like to see what they have planned up there. They ought to have some sort of a plan for what they're working towards, and just like you would for any business, a business plan, and they ought to sit down with our people in economic development. And see if they don't have any ideas that would benefit everybody. And I don't know what the options, other options are for the county. I know we have to be careful what we do and how we do it because it is a separate entity. But thank you.
Any other comments? Anything else for this afternoon?
I just want to get back to a question I had. I'd like a committee of the whole to interview our applicants for probation director. We will need to fill that by the end of September. And I was thinking, if you had a committee of the whole on the morning of September 7th, if you had a candidate you'd like to move forward after that interview, you have a public safety meeting that day as well. So that would be my suggestion, would be to think about a committee of the whole for that interview on the morning of September 7th.
Okay, that was on my list to talk to you about that after. Any others? We have a motion to adjourn. So moved. Support. Mr. Havey, having such a good time. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.